everyone. Thank you for joining us for our ACE webinar series segment 13. Today we'll discuss steps to troubleshoot common error types, and I'm really excited to get started. Presenting today will be myself. My name is Dana Cortez. I am the lead EMUE trainer and analyst. And we also have the pleasure of having Mike Harris here too, who is the senior consultant and ops manager. To get the most out of today's webinar, feel free to unmute your audio. We'll be taking questions at the end of the webinar, so the unmute button is on the left-hand side of your screen. If you're experiencing any webinar difficulties, feel free to chat with Mike or email him at mharris@databound.com. And we also have a chat window too and a Q&A process. So if for some reason you have a question right in the middle of the webinar, feel free to ask it. Mike will be there to answer your questions during the webinar. All right, so today we're going to talk about common error types such as user input errors and external errors. We are going to give you some general steps that you can take to troubleshoot those common error types. And then at the end of the webinar, we are going to discuss some upcoming webinars that we have within the next month. There's a lot of them on our website, so I want to make sure that you guys are as informed as possible. The Smart UI and web services on this slideshow is actually a link which directs you to our webinar page, so you can sign up for those additional webinars. And we will be sending the slideshow out in the next week or so. So what do I mean when I say user input error? This is any error that the individual writing the script may have overlooked or added. It could be incorrect data entry, such as incorrectly specifying a variable in a script that hasn't been initialized in the script. It could be a syntax error, such as mixing up two parameters in a command, or adding an additional parameter. External errors, on the other hand, are errors that happen outside of the user. It's easy to think of external errors like connection issues, such as with the website being down, or a terminal isn't connecting, or the input file is in a different place than you specified in your script. So let's dive into those common user input errors. So the first one I have up here is incorrect data entry, either in an input file or an EMUE. For this, I think about expecting a date in a certain format in EMUE, such as you're expecting 2 digits for the month, the day, and the year. But your input file has a month spelled out, 2 digits for the day, and 4 digits for the year. Or it could be where the field is completely empty in your Excel file, but you're expecting it to be filled in your EMUE script. Data entry errors are incredibly common when we look at Excel documents that people are filling out and creating because there's a large susceptibility to human error. Next one I have here is EMUE syntax errors. So this could be common, I think, with like if statements. If statements, there are parentheses, some items are separated by spaces, some items are separated by commas. Syntax errors could also be mixing up certain parameters. I think of getExcel data command. There are up to 6 parameters, and some of those parameters are optional. So it's easy to get them confused. So my last 2 items here are missing parameters for a command or adding additional parameters as well. So what do the steps look like to troubleshoot these user input errors? So this is what I want to discuss next, and I'll go through and kind of show you guys how those look, how those errors look, and how we're going to troubleshoot them. This list that I've created is a very general list. Not every error in EMUE will have finite steps to take. There are some flexibility portions on your part to figure out how to troubleshoot, but this list is to help you get a starting point for troubleshooting your errors. Whether you're new to scripting or experiencing an error and don't know where to begin, this is a great starting point to working with your errors. So the first one I have here is read your error message. Sometimes you receive an error message that has a lot of information in it and we don't really know what pieces to pick out of it. So I think that this is really important moving forward to try to find those little pieces that make sense to you and that you can then move forward with. So the first error message we have here is initializing a variable error message. In lieu of the most recent holiday being Halloween, I have chosen a Harry Potter theme. So we have Luna Lovegood as the name. All right, so we're looking at line 81 through 90. So in this script, what it's going to be doing is going to create 2 variables. One of them is called the encounter number and the next one's called name. It's going to create a list and then put those list members into a list ideally. So I'm stepping through and I can see that the list was created right here on the bottom of my screen. It says encounter list. So I'm going to double click on that so we can see right now it's not populated with anything. Now when I click F11, I can see that I've tried to run the script line, but an error message has popped up. It says there's been an EMUE script processing error, uninitialized variable encounter ID. So as I said, oftentimes we look at an error message and we don't really know how to handle it. Sometimes we get really long error messages. I call them ugly error messages. So for this one, it's saying uninitialized variable. I might not know what that uninitialized means, but I know that in EMUE, I'm creating variables and I do have a variable named encounter ID. So I can go from here and try to figure out maybe my variables aren't matching up with what I think they're matching up with, or they don't have any values to them. So I can hit OK. And then from here, I would check my variables tab. If I know that it's a variable issue, I'm always going to kind of look for my variables tab and just make sure that everything is aligned the way that I expect it to be aligned. Here I can see that I have encounter number and name, which are both populated with values. But when I look at line 90, I can see that I have encounter ID, which isn't populated with a value. I can even hover over it and see that too. You can hover over your variables and see if there's values in them. Fairly easy fix. I change that to number and I can hover over it and see that there's value. And I step through that. And so the next error message I have is kind of mixing up those parameters or adding additional parameters that aren't needed. And so for here, it's going to be the getListMember has those additional parameters, and we'll see how that looks in EMUE. We are looking at lines 101 through 106. I'm going to get Excel data into a second encounter list. So if I go over into my list tab, I can see that this new list has been populated. I'm going to check if I'm at the end of the list, and then I'm going to get the list member. Now, when I do this, it says that there's been an EMUE script processing error, very similar to the one we saw before. Number of parameters 6 not equal to the number of fields 4 in the list item for getListMember. For this, I can see that it's talking about parameters, but even if I don't know what parameters and fields are, I can look and see that it's related to a list. I know that I've created a list, so it's related to that list somewhere. And I can also see that there is getListMember, which is my most recent command. So I can click OK. And I would say that anytime that you're dealing with a list and you realize that it's a list error that you're getting, it's always good to check lists, just like it's good to check the variables tab. So here I've already checked lists, and I can see that there are 4 columns in this list. I have my first name, last name, encounter number, and date of birth, but I don't have address and phone number. So I can erase these. F11 and to move forward. It's also really important to be careful of spacing too with getListMember. Sometimes we can create extra spaces, and that might create problems in our scripts. That's an example of reading an error message and trying to kind of pick out pieces here and there that make sense to you, even if the entire error message doesn't make sense. Next up I have is to examine the syntax in the help topic. This is really important. I call the help topic the Google of EMUE. It is incredibly beneficial for you. So what's great about the help topic is that you can check the command syntax, and you can even look at examples of the command in EMUE, which is really helpful if you're trying to figure out where those parameters fall. The example I have here is we're going to see a command where I've kind of mixed up the parameters, and we're going to receive an error message, and from here we're going to check the help topic. So once again, on line 141 through 143, I've created a variable called name. It is populated with Luna Lovegood, and I'm separating the last name from the entire name on line 143. So when I do that, I receive an error message that says that there's been a script parsing error. Now, I might not know what script parsing error means, and I can check here that it says that there's a comma, and I know that there's a comma in my entire line. And I can also see that it's related to a fields number, and it's looking for something that's numeric. So I can hit OK. And for a parsing error, I would usually check the help topic for that. One way to check the help topic is to highlight the commands that you're working with. You can click Help and then open the help topic this way. The other way to do that, if you like shortcut keys, which I'm a huge fan of shortcut keys, you can highlight the command and then click F1. And that'll also open up the help topic. So as I said, the help topic is very beneficial for you. It has the syntax for your variables and for your commands. So you can check, it says copy field, variable name, source variable, field number, and delimiter. And I can even see examples down below. So the example here has the 2 before the comma. So this is kind of where it looks like I've made that mistake. On line 143, I haven't placed that 1 before the comma. Now I step through and I can hover over last name, and it says Lovegood, and the name says Luna Lovegood. I can even look at my variables tab too to see that those are now separated. It's exactly what I'm expecting. So that's kind of an example of steps that you can do to troubleshoot. You can examine the syntax for the help topic. You can even read your error message. The third item I have here is your activity log. So this is really important once when you're done kind of with debugging mode and your script is in production. Scripts can still error even when they're in production. The difference is that you won't receive an error message. So that error message that pops up on the screen that we've seen the past couple of times with copy field, get list member, and with the uninitialized variable, that won't happen when you're in production mode. You'll receive an email or you'll have to check the activity log to make sure that your script is still moving the way that you want it to or running the way you want it to. One method to establish an activity log in EMUE is to create a set startup. So I've done that up at the top of this script, so I'll scroll on up and then we can see what that looks like. So on line 38, I created a set startup called activity log file. And so this creates an activity log every time I run this script, and it kind of keeps track of how your script is running. That's the whole point of an activity log, is to keep track of, are you looking for an input file? Have you found that input file? Where's your error line? What's the message that your error is giving you? So it's really helpful once when you're in that production mode stage to have this set startup established. And so where do you look for this activity log? You can look for this activity log in your activity logs folder, which you've also specified in EMUE with that folder pathway. And this is kind of the general structure we suggest for folder pathways when you're working with scripts. It's really important to kind of keep everything organized, and that's what this folder pathway does. You have a space for your input files, you have a space for after your input files are processed, you even have a space for any work lists that you're creating from your input file. And you also have a space to know when your script is running and how it's running. So this is where these are located. So if I go into activity logs, I can see that there's a bunch of activity logs here with how my script has been running this time. And so I can see where it's errored out. It says like error line number 79, 86, 94, and I can even see what that error message is kind of related to. And I can see what time it's also hit that error message and the date. And so the final step I have for troubleshooting user input errors is to debug your script line by line. And this is a very good summary of kind of what we've already looked at. Checking your script line by line is really important. You want to see and make sure that everything that you're expecting to happen is happening as you run through your script. So you want to check your variable tabs. Are the values kind of what you expected? You want to check the syntax and examples for the command in the help topic. And you also want to check your lists if the error message is related to a list command. Next, we're going to talk about the common external errors. And those are the errors that are related to website issues, terminal, and sometimes your input files as well. So the first one we have here is your website. So common website errors are related to your web browser disconnecting or it's busy. It can even be that the web page hasn't loaded completely. And it can be too that developers have updated the page. Sometimes they don't tell you when they're updating a page. Sometimes they do. They'll say that there's maintenance happening on a third-party website, but other times they won't inform you of that, and it'll just change in the background. The additional common website error is your internet settings too. I've seen that when a computer restarts or a server restarts, that sometimes those internet settings change back to their default settings. So it's really important to make sure that you have proper internet settings, and I'll kind of show you what that looks like. The steps to troubleshoot website errors. You want to establish the correct internet settings. This is probably the most important if for some reason EMUE isn't interacting with Story in the way it usually does. It's not recognizing dialog boxes. It's not recognizing pages for some reason. Make sure to check your internet settings. So when I click this, and you guys will have access to this as well once we put this up and everything. This leads to our Databound knowledge base, which is really great. It informs you of the correct internet settings for your PC, and you can use this to kind of move forward. Next is use wait for web elements. So wait for web elements are incredibly important. This command stops the script from processing until the specified timeout has exceeded or the web element defined in the command is available on the current web page. So what it's doing is it's slowing your script down. Oftentimes, EMUE will try to run faster than your web page loads, which is not always helpful. You don't want EMUE to go around and click and type information into a web page unless it's completely loaded. So this is the syntax for it. It's got a timeout, and it only waits up to that time. That's kind of important. So if that web element does load on the page within 10 seconds, it'll continue moving forward even if you've established it as 30 seconds. And then it has an element identifier as well. It's important to mention that the timeout is in seconds. Some of our commands have timeouts in milliseconds, other times it is seconds. And the element identifier can also be a smart name too, which is really nice. So this is important to use wait for web elements whenever you're navigating between pages or dialog boxes. Next one I have is to check for your website and Sorian updates. Odds are if Sorian is updating, you might know about it. It's probably been around in your facility. They've been talking about it. So you'll know if Sorian is updating, but it's important to check your third-party websites too, since they do update often. And sometimes, as I mentioned, they won't always tell you that they're updating. It's important to establish error handling for your website. This is incredibly important. Error handling is one of those concepts that's kind of hard to grasp because of the fact that it's thinking ahead. It's thinking, what can happen if my website for some reason isn't loading? What do I want my script to do? If my records are in a different format than I expect, what do I want my script to be able to handle and do? Same thing for password expiration, or if for some reason you can't log into your website. It's really thinking about errors that can happen ahead of time. And that's kind of the main portion of error handling. We do have a webinar on error handling too, so I've placed that down here. It leads to our YouTube page, and feel free to check that out. I think it's really, really great. Error handling can be covered within like 45 minutes, maybe even 2 hours. It's a pretty big topic, and so that's really beneficial, and it's really important to establish that in your script, especially once when you've moved to production mode. Okay, so those are kind of common external errors for websites. Next one is going to be common external errors for terminal. So common terminal errors are based on really a large portion of your set startups. So if you have inaccurate set startups, that can create connectivity errors between the terminal and EMUE. So it's really important to establish those set startups in the very beginning. System outages can also be a case too for terminal errors, and a user session can expire too. Steps to troubleshoot those terminal errors is really to check your set startups and make sure that you're following those steps. So for Rumba interface type, you want to make sure that you have TN3270 or TN5250, or that you're using a Unix system that you've specified that in your Rumba interface type. For your SNA server, you want to make sure that that's your IP address, that's your DNS server, and you want to make sure that you are putting that in correctly as well, and your sign-on pathway, which can be different for whether you're doing Envision, Signature, or you're using RPMS. Here's an example, and if at any point you're kind of confused and like, oh, I don't know what the command is or kind of what the syntax is for that command, you can always check it and see. So for sign-on pathway, if you're not sure which sign-on pathway you're supposed to use, you can check it by doing sign-on tab, password enter. You can check your help topic to kind of figure out where your sign-on pathway is for your terminal. The next step to troubleshoot terminal error system outages is to use the built-in variable &terminal connected. This is a Boolean variable that gives you information about whether or not your terminal is connected. It'll say either true or false. So for this example, I have just log in, and it says that on error, it wants you to go to the terminal connection. So it's going to check if your terminal connection is false, then you're going to want to reconnect to your terminal, go back to log in, and then you put your process for connecting the terminal here. EMUE can automatically put you through to the terminal in the very beginning, but it can't do that when it's disconnected. So once it's disconnected, you have to know your own login process and kind of put those steps up above. And for some reason, if it's not a terminal connection issue and you've reached an error, then what it's going to do is it's just going to exit that script, which is why we have the exit error right here. It's going to exit that script and then just send you an email if you've established that in your settings. Our next common external error can fall with input files. So this could be that you brought in an incorrect file type. For some reason, you're expecting an Excel file, but you've received a CSV file instead. So you kind of want to think ahead of how your script should handle that circumstance. It could be that you have a different input folder pathway in your script than what your actual input file is. It could also be an unstandardized format. So for example, you have dates sometimes and no dates, and then you have like the last name, comma, space, first name, and middle initial sometimes, but sometimes it's just last name, comma, space, first name. So that can create issues if you haven't handled that throughout your script. And it also can be that you're expecting data in a certain format, but you don't get that data in a certain format. So as I said before, kind of with the date, if you're getting a date that has 4 digits for the year, 2 digits for the day, 2 digits for the month, but you're expecting it differently in EMUE, then that can also affect the way that EMUE processes your script. The most important step to troubleshoot input file errors, I would say, is definitely check your input file tab and check your list tab. These are very important. I can show you where they're located. So in EMUE, that would be down here at the bottom where it says input file. This will be if you're receiving a CSV or a text file. This is where that information will come in. If you're receiving an Excel document, Access, or you're doing a SQL database connection, it will appear here in your lists tab. Next step is to check your folder pathway that you specified in EMUE. As I said, this can sometimes give you issues if for some reason you've specified a folder pathway that no longer exists, or your pathway has moved around a bit, or your script has moved around a bit, and you haven't established that input file folder. So it's really important to check your set startups. Where that's located is at the top as well. You can see on line 28, I have set startup input file where I've established my script folder. Script folder moniker, if you guys aren't using it, it's fantastic. Script folder moniker is great. It looks for where your script is located and then takes the folder pathway for where your script is located, and it'll attach, your input file. And for this one, it's looking for any input file. That's what the star.star is. It's wildcard, so it's looking for anything that can exist here. You can put, if you're looking for a very specific file, you can put like CSV, you can put text, you can even put the name of the entire file in there too, if you wanted to. So this is where you would be establishing that input file. Next step I have is to check your actual input file. Sometimes we think that we're receiving one input file, but we receive another. I know that sometimes I've had where we're expecting a file with 17 records and we've received a file that has 14,000 records. Very different. So it's always good to kind of check your input file and make sure that that information is what you need. You can do that by going into that folder structure that we talked about before, clicking on input files, and then opening up that specific input file. Now, I don't suggest opening this up while your script is running. That can create issues. So it's always good to close it down as you're running your script. But it's good to check it and make sure that it has the information that you expect to handle in your script. So the final step I have here is to verify your input data. So this is really important too. Verification is part of error handling, believe it or not. So you're checking to make sure that the information that you're receiving from your input file is kind of what you expect. And that's what I've done here on the right-hand side. I have encounter numbers, so I'm checking to make sure that it's 11 numerical digits. You can do it to check if it has alphabetical or whatever you're looking for. You can put certain error handling in your scripts that kind of checks for this information. Let's show you how that kind of looks in EMUE. I've also added here too to check if something is a date or not. So if you do receive an empty field and it's not a date, you might want to handle your script differently or handle this input file differently. This one I have encounter number that's populated with a number, so it should hit debug and continue running through the script. Else I might want to do something else if I'm expecting all numerical data. From here on line 126, I'm checking to see whether or not that date of birth variable is a date. If it's not a date, then I want to do something else. And you can even change information too, like such as date format. You can use that to format certain dates to what you want to put into, Saurian, for example. Saurian has specific date formats that need to match, so you can do that right from the very beginning when you grab your input file. Right, so those are common external errors and kind of how you can go about troubleshooting them for website, terminal, and your input files as well. So lastly, I kind of wanted to talk about upcoming webinars that we have. So we have quite a few coming up. Within this month, we have our webinar 14. We're going to be talking about EMUE 5.1 as well as Saurian Smart UI. They're fantastic. It's going to be changing the way that we kind of use smart names. It's making it more reliable. It's making it a little bit easier to script, more durable. So I definitely suggest coming to that webinar. We also have one on how insurance discovery maximizes reimbursements. We're going to be talking about our brand new product, which is really exciting. We have, it's looking for insurance verification and insurance discovery, so really important things. And then finally, we also have web services, which is coming out for Saurian, which is fantastic. Super excited about it. So feel free to check out that webinar in December.